Weekly News. We are glad you could tune in. I am Brooklyn Murray, and tonight's story is about the recent changes in NASA. As we know, NASA's space shuttles have been shut down, but we still have diligent workers trying to accomplish a space shuttle to and from other planets in a timely manner. We look back at NASA's history of accomplishments and faults and how it is still impacting us today. One of the most memorable events in NASA's history is when the Challenger space shuttle exploded. The shuttle vanished from the blue Florida sky, leaving only white corkscrews of smoke hanging in the air. Here are a few people who were willing to share their thoughts and their personal stories about the explosion in 1986.
Yeah, my memory of the Challenger Center accident was I was a senior in high school, Robert E. Lee High School in Montgomery, Alabama. I was changing classes, and one of my friends came up to me and said, Doug, did you hear? I said, hear what? He said that the shuttle exploded, and I was devastated. I knew I wanted to be an engineer or in the sciences or even wanted to be an astronaut, so to hear that we lost one of our shuttles was very traumatic for me.
My generation, when we were sitting in class remembering it or watching it, you had a pretty good understanding of what had just happened. You know, you saw the thing come apart and the altitude it was at. You pretty well knew that nobody was going to live through it for the most part.
I was working at the time and I didn't hear about it immediately. It was a sad and tragic event.
I was at home sick with my brother when I was in 7th grade, and we remember seeing it on TV, and had a big impact on my mother because I remember she came home right away from work.
When you come in here and look at this thing sitting back here behind us, it's home a little more about what probably happened to those people that were inside of it.
Until major accidents happen, you always think that it is something that can't happen, that you can't lose astronauts in space because we got very good at doing it.
I guess it gives you a greater respect for the astronauts. What they do go through.
Coming up in 2011 and 2012, the Space Shuttle fleet will be retiring, and the last shuttle mission is going to be Endeavour.
I'm disappointed. I'd like to see the space program continue.
I'm kind of excited about, what's going to come next. Push the technology again and to make more advances.
That's what is next is space tourism. There's a lot of talk about getting folks up into space for a certain amount of money, and I know sign me up. I would love to be one of the first tourist astronauts. I'd love to see the Earth from orbit. I hope in my lifetime and my son's lifetime that they'll be able to experience either that kind of experience, a weightless experience looking at the Earth, or perhaps seeing the next somebody take the next step on another world.
Before we look at the explosion itself, we first need to look at the direction NASA was heading before the explosion.
The NASA program started on October 1st, 1958 due to the United States and the Soviet space race. On October 4th, 1957, Soviets launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. This pushed the United States to get their space program up and running. On January 31st, 1958, the United States launched their first satellite, Explorer 1. This was a great accomplishment for the United States. We were now back on top again. The space program was doing very well. They accomplished landing on the moon, creating a telescope that views the solar system in a more detailed way.
In 1986, the NASA program took a turn for the worse. The Space Shuttle Challenger was one of NASA's greatest triumphs. The Challenger took off on January 28, 1986 at 11:38 a.m. They had delayed this takeoff 3 times already before this cold morning. There was a combustion gas leak after ignition, causing weakening and penetration of the external tank, resulting in structural breakup and loss of the space shuttle in 73 seconds after takeoff. The crew cabin tore loose from the rest of the shuttle and soared through the air. It took almost 3 minutes for the cabin to fall into the Atlantic Ocean, where it smashed on impact, killing the 7 crew members. The Challenger was the first space shuttle disaster. This mission was highly publicized because it was the first time a high school teacher, a civilian, was allowed to travel in space. The explosion resulted NASA suspending shuttle flights for 2 years. NASA took several big hits to their credibility. Most Americans remained supportive of the space program, but they lost trust in NASA. It took many years for NASA to gain its credibility. Decades after the tragedy, NASA using Repent as a forgiveness strategy, most agreed it is now viewed as a turning point for NASA. With the Russian space program running at full speed, Americans realized they couldn't afford to abandon their space program. For NASA to gain forgiveness from the public, they had to rectify the problem with the shuttle program and their own decision-making processes. Their address of every issue is in the Commission's report showed their acknowledgement that the system was broke. Since the crash of the Challenger, NASA has attempted to streamline and clean up its communication lines. Now the astronauts themselves are more active in many decision-making aspects of the program.
To avoid making this mistake in the future, they could wait for a more weather-suitable day, for the cold weather had caused the gas leak. In 1986, NASA could have prevented the explosion by delaying the takeoff even more because of the problems they were having. It was a tragic day for NASA and America, but because of the explosion, we have learned a lot about safety and taking the right precautionaries for space. Thank you for tuning into tonight's show. Please join us next week as we talk about the changes in music history.